Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a really fascinating and complex aspect of Southeast Asian politics. We're talking about the enduring influence of political dynasties and specifically the powerful women who've risen to lead within them. We've taken your sources, articles, research, notes, and we're going to explore how these figures came to power and, their impact on democracy across the region.
Absolutely. And what's striking is just how deep these dynastic roots go. You can trace them back to colonial times, post-independence eras, where local elites often just, transitioned into political roles. They established these family legacies that really continue to shape things today. We'll be looking at people like Corazon, Aquino and Gloria, Macapagal, Arroyo in the Philippines, Aung San Suu Kyi of Myanmar, Megawati Sukarnoputri from Indonesia, and also Thailand's Paetongtarn Shinawatra. Quite a list.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Starting in the Philippines, a country with, as you said, a rich history of these dynasties, and two really transformative female leaders. First up, Corazon Aquino, often called the reluctant revolutionary. Her rise was incredibly dramatic, almost cinematic, really. From the sources, what were those key moments that let her galvanize opposition after her husband Ninoy's assassination?
Well, her rise was extraordinary. Ninoy Aquino's assassination in '83 definitely ignited widespread anger against the Marcos regime.
Yeah.
But Cory Aquino herself wasn't initially, a political figure. The real turning point was that 1986 snap election. Marcos was declared the winner, but NAMFREL, the National Movement for Free Elections, their count showed her winning.
Ah, the contested results.
Exactly. And that discrepancy, it fueled massive public outrage. It all culminated in her call for the Tagumpang Bayan rally, the People's Victory Rally, and an incredible 2 million people showed up. This wasn't just a protest. It was like a visible popular mandate forming right there.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. That public momentum then merged with critical shifts within the power structure. You had the military defections, Defense Minister Enrile, General Ramos, big names, and then Cardinal Sin's public appeal for people to join the protests. That whole combination transformed a massive demonstration into the People Power Revolution. February 25th, 1986, Marcos is exiled, Aquino is inaugurated. How did that unique path to power shape her first moves as president?
It shaped absolutely everything. Her very first act, Proclamation #1, was this sweeping government reorganization. Demanded resignations, even from the Supreme Court, anyone tied to the old regime. And crucially, she immediately abolished the 1973 Constitution, the one Marcos used for martial law, replaced it with the provisional 1986 Freedom Constitution. This basically consolidated executive and legislative power in her hands.
Which sounds authoritarian, but the goal was different.
Exactly. The stated goal wasn't to hold on to power, but to steer the country quickly back towards democratic institutions. It was a radical move, maybe a necessary one, to dismantle that old structure.
And her vision for agrarian reform was central to that rebuilding, wasn't it? Which makes her own family background wealthy landed such a fascinating paradox. How did that lineage affect her push for land reform, especially with the criticism it drew?
Yeah, that was a defining challenge. She came from the Coanco family, very landed elite. Yet she issued Presidential Proclamation 131 and Executive Order 229. These paved the way for the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law, or CRR, in 1988. The aim was significant land redistribution. Landowners compensated, but limited to keeping just 5 hectares.
A huge shift.
Huge, but the sources definitely highlight the challenge. You're reforming a system where power, wealth, land, it's all deeply intertwined. So this internal conflict, a leader from an elite family challenging the very system that nurtured her. It really tested those democratic ideals.
That's a powerful point. And this period wasn't without tragedy, like the Mendiola massacre.
Yeah.
What did that event show about the resistance to reform, and how did it hit her administration?
The Mendiola massacre, January '87, 12 farmers killed during a peaceful protest for land reform. It was stark, tragic. It really underlined the deep divisions and resistance she was up against. It led to cabinet resignations, too. And then there's the economy. She inherited this colossal debt from Marcos.
Right. What did she do about that?
Her decision to honor the debt was controversial. She paid off about $4 billion. But it was strategic, aimed at improving international credit standing. And even though her administration took on an additional $9 billion in debt, the overall external debt to GDP ratio actually fell significantly.
Really? How much?
It went from about 87.9% down to 67.8% by 1991. So it meant the Philippines regained some crucial trust, some flexibility internationally, laid a foundation. She also oversaw things like the Built-Operate Transfer Law, signaling more private sector involvement.
So, thinking about her legacy then, after her presidency, her unique rise seemed to set her up as a global figure.
Absolutely, she really transcended the presidency, became a global symbol for democracy, human rights, women's empowerment. She actively petitioned for Aung San Suu Kyi's release in '94, joined the Council of Women World Leaders. When she passed away, the outpouring of sympathy from world leaders Pope Benedict, Presidents Obama, Clinton, it really highlighted her international standing. Her legacy isn't just about restoring democracy, maybe imperfectly, but about that principled leadership against huge odds.
A truly impactful figure. Okay, moving to another powerful woman from the Philippines, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. She came to power after President Joseph Estrada was ousted. Her initial public reception, it was a bit more nuanced, wasn't it?
It was her first SWS net satisfaction rating, that's the Social Weather Station survey, in March 2001, was a moderate plus 24%. But what's interesting is the breakdown. Satisfaction was highest among the wealthiest, Class ABC, and in Metro Manila, but it was actually negative in the Visayas region, down at negative 20%.
So a geographical split in support.
Yeah, it suggests her initial base was more among the urban elite, with skepticism elsewhere, a divide that kind of continued. Though, interestingly, satisfaction was pretty consistent across genders, so broad, if only moderate, support overall.
And Arroyo's presidency is often viewed through an economic lens, given her background as an economist. What were the main features of her approach? Did her dynastic background play into those priorities? Her father was president too, of course.
Yes, Diosdado Macapagal. Her economic background definitely shaped her administration. She really highlighted investments in infrastructure, roads, bridges, ports, airports, big projects, plus expansive social programs. Sources mention nearly 9 out of 10 Filipinos having health insurance by the end of her term. Over 100,000 new classrooms built, supposedly 9 million jobs created.
Those are big numbers.
They are. Her own commentary really stressed commitment to growth. Things like subsidized rice, discounted fuel, electricity, advancing land reform for farmers, indigenous communities too. She even tried constitutional reform in 2005, set up a consultative commission. Though she denied wanting to extend her term, her view seemed to be that growth was paramount. She even criticized later administrations for, quote, underspending in the name of good governance.
Implying maybe they were too cautious.
Perhaps. It suggests a leader really focused on tangible economic upliftment and maybe, yes, leveraging her dynastic connections and influence to push through those ambitious large-scale projects.
Okay, let's shift focus now to Myanmar and the very complex, ultimately tragic story of Aung San Suu Kyi, a Nobel laureate, led an elected civilian government, only for it to be overthrown by the military in early 2021.
It's just a profound and frankly heartbreaking story. What's central is her deep connection to the struggle against military rule. She spent a total of 19 years under detention by various juntas, an incredible sacrifice. Yet, her NLD government's approach to the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya, that's a critical and heavily criticized aspect.
How so?
Well, the sources suggest they chose to support, or at least appease, the junta on this issue. This led to a significant loss of support from the West. Now, from their perspective, maybe it seemed pragmatic, maybe they felt direct confrontation was unwinnable at that point, but paradoxically, this appeasement, this attempt perhaps to maintain stability, actually seemed to strengthen the junta. It allowed the military to play on Burmese nationalism, religious unity narratives.
Which brings up leadership style. The sources suggest her NLD government ended up mirroring some junta and even colonial styles. That corruption shifted rather than disappeared. And her personal style was described as demanding reverence, reluctant to take advice. How did that contribute, despite her huge popularity, to things falling apart?
It seems to have been a significant factor. Look, the NLD had this golden opportunity after years of military rule, but they were operating under severe constraints. The junta's constitution was restrictive, the military kept its power base, and, the sources point out, the NLD had its own political shortcomings too. So her leadership style, described as a kind of strongman style, based on immense popularity but lacking hard institutional power.
It wasn't enough.
It proved unsustainable against the military, who still held key levers of power constitutionally and physically. The sources suggest a concentration of power around her personally, which might have hindered, a more flexible, responsive democratic system from developing.
And the situation now in Myanmar is just dire. ASEAN urging the military to prioritize peace over elections. But with the military guaranteed 25% of legislative seats, widespread oppression, free and fair elections seem impossible, right?
Utterly impossible under current conditions. That 25% guarantee gives the military a veto on any real constitutional change, locks in their power. And the oppression ensures no genuine opposition can even function safely. Any election would just be a facade. Even humanitarian aid gets weaponized.
Yep.
After Cyclone Mocha hit, millions affected. The junta refused to authorize aid workers properly, held up supplies, kept tight restrictions.
Just obstructing help.
It looked like more than just obstruction or inefficiency. It seemed like a deliberate strategy, collective punishment almost, prioritizing political control over people's lives. It really shows the military's grip and, frankly, the limits of international influence right now.
Grim indeed. Okay, let's turn to Indonesia. Our sources draw that clear line from the founding father, Sukarno, to his daughter, Megawati Sukarnoputri, another dynasty. How did that lineage position her in Indonesian politics? What kind of challenges did she face?
Megawati's position was unique. She inherited this immense symbolic capital as Sukarno's daughter. He led Indonesia to independence. Indonesia's identity is shaped by Pancasila, that philosophy emphasizing unity, justice, democracy, and unity in diversity, aiming for a state that's neither theocratic nor purely secular. This informs their foreign policy, too, promoting democracy in ASEAN, like through the Bali Democracy Forum. For many Indonesians, Megawati, coming after the long Suharto era, symbolized a return to those earlier ideals. She definitely benefited from nostalgia for her father.
But the sources also mention persistent challenges for women in Indonesian politics, despite these progressive ideals on paper. How did Megawati's presidency reflect or maybe navigate those hurdles, even with her dynastic advantage?
It's a complex picture, yeah. Educational opportunities for women have expanded. There are labor laws for maternity leave, breastfeeding breaks, even menstruation leave. But traditional family roles, still deeply ingrained. So the path to leadership for women remains tough. Megawati had the name recognition, lineage, huge advantages, but she still operated within a deeply patriarchal political culture. And what's telling, perhaps, is that even in the recent 2024 presidential race, candidates mostly talked about women's issues under the umbrella of vulnerable groups.
Focusing on economics rather than leadership.
Primarily economic contributions, yeah. Less focus on enhancing leadership or tackling systemic barriers. And very little talk about reforming parts of the criminal code, say on contraception info or abortion penalties. It shows how deep those traditional views still run, even after having a female president. Her tenure was a breakthrough, for sure, but didn't fundamentally shift those underlying views overnight.
Right. Okay, finally, let's look at Thailand and the Shinawatra clan, a divisive dynasty, as the sources put it, now extended by Paetongtarn Shinawatra, Thailand's youngest ever prime minister. Her arrival has certainly stirred things up.
It really has, and what's fascinating is how her father, Thaksin, created this modern populist style. He politically activated huge swaths of the rural population, creating this intense, almost worship-level loyalty. That populist legacy directly paved the way for Paetongtarn. She benefits from that deep support.
But also inherits the baggage.
Exactly. She inherits the intense polarization, the opposition that's defined the Shinawatra family saga for decades. So her leadership is constantly under the microscope, watch for signs of her father's influence. It creates inherent challenges for stability and, the perception of fairness.
And there was immediate controversy. That leaked phone call with Cambodian leader Hun Sen, calling him uncle, herself niece, urging him to ignore our opponents, a specific Thai general, saying she wanted peace, wouldn't react publicly to his hostile posts because she loves and respects him, offering to take care of things. What does that leak tell us about power and personal networks in this kind of dynastic system?
It's incredibly revealing. It wasn't formal diplomacy, was it? It was personal, familiar. Suggests bypassing official channels. It hints at relying on personal relationships, informal networks, maybe over formal state processes, which could be efficient, sure, but also deeply problematic for accountability. It immediately raised questions about foreign policy conduct, separation of powers, and the fallout was instant. Demands for her resignation, a major coalition partner, Phumjaitai, pulled out. She also faced and survived a no-confidence vote over her father's alleged influence. It just shows the constant scrutiny she's under.
What about her policy stances so far? Cannabis regulation and that comment about central bank independence.
Right. On cannabis, she's pushing for regulation, not an outright ban, though controls have tightened due to smuggling. Seems pragmatic, balancing health and economics. The statement that central bank independence is an obstacle, yeah, that's pretty provocative for a new leader.
What does that suggest?
It suggests a desire for more executive control over monetary policy. Kind of echoes previous Shinawatra governments prioritizing rapid growth, maybe even if it means challenging institutional checks. It definitely raises questions about how her administration will balance economic goals with independent governance principles, what it signals for Thai democracy going forward.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear these stories are diverse, but there are common threads, aren't there? Powerful women in Southeast Asian political dynasties navigating really complex landscapes, from Corazon Aquino's revolutionary rise, pushing for democracy, to Gloria Macapagal Arroyo's economic focus, Aung San Suu Kyi's incredibly difficult legacy in Myanmar, Megawati Sukarno within Indonesia's founding lineage, and now, Paetongtarn Shinawatra's controversial start in Thailand. Each one has left a mark on their nation's democratic path.
Absolutely. They all face unique challenges, often inheriting significant political capital, sure, but also dealing with entrenched power structures, societal expectations, things that can both empower and constrain. Their paths to power, their impact, it really offers this rich tapestry of leadership in one of the world's most dynastic regions. It highlights that constant interplay between family legacy, national hopes, and, the always evolving nature of democracy itself.